My boss's wife noticed what I couldn't see. It started with a glance that lasted too long. I was standing by the office coffee machine, pretending to look at my phone, when she walked in, elegant, composed, and confident in a way that made everyone straighten their posture. Mrs. Langford, my boss's wife. She had that kind of presence that made you aware of every detail about yourself. The crease in your shirt, the nervous way you held your cup, the way your voice quivered when you greeted her. I don't remember what I said that day, but I remember her eyes lingering. Not judgmentally, but with a strange kind of curiosity, as though she saw something I didn't yet understand. Later that afternoon, she stopped by my desk. "You have interesting posture," she said suddenly, setting down her purse. I blinked, unsure how to respond. She smiled. "Not bad, just uncertain. Like you're waiting for permission to exist." Her words echoed in my mind for days. Permission to exist. I didn't know what she meant, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the following week, she visited the office more often. Each time, she would exchange a few words with me, small observations, but sharp. "You're hiding behind your clothes. You look like someone trying not to be noticed. You have a softness in your expression. You should let it show." It wasn't criticism. It was like she was studying a painting that wasn't finished yet. One Friday, as the office emptied for the weekend, she appeared beside my desk again. "Do you trust me?" she asked, her tone calm but commanding. I hesitated, then nodded. "Good," she said. "Come to my studio tomorrow. You'll understand why." I didn't know why I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet authority she carried. Or maybe it was something deeper. The feeling that she had seen through the thin mask I wore every day. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of a tall glass building on the quiet side of the city. The sign on the door read Langford Image Atelier. Inside, the air smelled faintly of perfume and linen. Mirrors lined the walls, and mannequins stood in graceful poses, draped in tailored elegance. Mrs. Langford was waiting near the window, dressed in muted ivory, her hair tied back neatly. She smiled as I entered. "I'm glad you came." "I'm not sure what this is about," I said quietly. "That's fine," she replied. "You don't need to. You just need to trust that what I see is worth discovering." She led me to a mirror, motioning for me to stand before it. "Look at yourself," she said. "Really look. Not as you think others see you, but as you are." I tried, but my gaze darted away almost instantly. My reflection felt unfamiliar, distant. "Exactly," she murmured. "You look without seeing. That's what we're going to change." She turned toward a rack of clothes, soft fabrics, subtle colors, and began to select a few pieces. "You hide behind stiffness," she said. "We'll start by softening how you move, how you carry yourself, how you exist." As I stood there, watching her assemble what looked like an entirely new version of me, I realized I was no longer nervous. Just curious. Something in her tone, her deliberate movements, made me feel safe, even as uncertainty buzzed through my chest. When she finally looked back at me, her expression was calm but intense. "You don't have to be afraid of transformation," she said softly. "Sometimes the world won't give you permission to change, but I will." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deep within me. That day, standing before a mirror I had always avoided, I felt something shift quietly inside, a small, fragile beginning of something I didn't yet have the language for. And for the first time, I wanted to see what she saw. The following Saturday morning, I found myself back in her studio, unsure if I'd made the right choice. The place was quiet, filled with soft light and the faint hum of the city outside. Mrs. Langford was already there, arranging fabrics across a long table, colors I wouldn't have thought twice about before. Muted rose, lavender, cream. "Punctual," she said with a faint smile. "That's good. Transformation requires discipline as much as courage." I nodded, still uneasy. "You make it sound like this is training." "In a way, it is," she said. "We're training your awareness. How you see yourself. How you present yourself." She motioned for me to stand in front of a mirror again. "Let's start with something simple. Stand naturally." I did, awkwardly unsure what naturally even meant anymore. See, she said softly, circling me. You hold tension in your shoulders. Your chin tilts down, your stance is defensive. You've built a posture that apologizes for existing. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She gently touched my shoulder. Relax here. Breathe. I inhaled slowly. Now lift your chin slightly, yes. That's better. When you enter a room, it should feel like you're inviting the space to meet you, not shrinking away from it. Her instruction was delicate yet precise. Every small adjustment carried weight, meaning. She wasn't teaching me how to act. She was teaching me how to be. After a while, she stepped back. You see how different that feels. I looked at my reflection. The changes were small, but noticeable. My posture was open, my gaze steadier. Good, she said. Now we move to expression. She guided me toward a table of accessories and fabrics. Every detail matters, she explained. The way fabric moves when you walk, the way color complements your tone, it's all part of expression. Style is language without words. I watched as she held up a soft, flowing scarf. Try this. It was light, barely noticeable in my hands. I hesitated before draping it around my shoulders. Now walk, she said simply. I took a few steps, feeling strangely self-conscious. The fabric moved with me, responding to every gesture. It was liberating. Again, she said, her tone encouraging. But this time, stop thinking about how you look. Feel how it moves with you. Let your body guide it. When I did, something shifted. The awkwardness melted into something more natural, almost graceful. I wasn't performing. I was aligning. She smiled faintly. Better. Much better. I caught my reflection again, and for the first time, the image didn't look unfamiliar. It looked like someone beginning to belong to themselves. Do you see what I see now? She asked. I swallowed hard. I think I'm starting to. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. This isn't about becoming someone else, she said. It's about discovering the version of you that's been buried under expectation. Those words stayed with me long after I left the studio. That evening, I caught myself standing taller while brushing my teeth, moving with a gentler confidence that hadn't existed before. The mirror no longer felt like an adversary. It felt like an ally, one that finally reflected a glimpse of the person I was learning to be. And as I fell asleep that night, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore of what this transformation meant. Because for the first time, it wasn't about pleasing anyone. It was about finally understanding myself. I returned to the studio the next weekend with a different kind of nervousness, less fear, more anticipation. The space felt familiar now. The scent of fabric, the muted light reflected in mirrors, the quiet hum of something transformative always about to happen. Mrs. Langford was waiting by the window, her expression calm, her tone almost musical when she spoke. Today, she said, we explore presence. The way you move, the way you sound, the energy you bring into a room. Expression begins before words. She gestured toward the open floor. Walk. I obeyed, my steps uncertain at first. Too rigid, she said softly. You walk like someone afraid of being heard. Start again. Imagine the ground isn't judging you. It's supporting you. I tried again, slower this time. She watched closely. Better. Loosen your arms. Allow rhythm. Her guidance was gentle but relentless, like water shaping stone. She corrected every detail. How my shoulders moved, how my gaze drifted, how hesitation revealed itself in tiny gestures. Each correction brought me closer to something I hadn't known I could feel, calm authority. Now your voice, she said. Speak a single sentence. Something ordinary. I hesitated, then said, the sky looks clear today. Again, she instructed. But this time, speak as if you want to be heard by yourself first, then the world. The sky looks clear today, I repeated, my tone steadying. Good. You hear the difference. I did. It wasn't louder, just more certain, anchored. She smiled faintly. You're learning that presence isn't volume. It's conviction. Over the next hour, we practiced conversation, posture, gestures, every movement deliberate, every expression genuine. She explained how authenticity creates elegance, how stillness can speak louder than noise, how quiet confidence can command attention. When we paused for tea, she studied me thoughtfully. "You're starting to carry yourself differently. Do you feel it?" I nodded. "It's strange. I feel lighter." "That's self-alignment," she said simply. "When the inside stops fighting the outside." Her words settled over me like warmth. I realized that this process wasn't cosmetic. It was emotional engineering, undoing years of guardedness and replacing them with trust in myself. Before I left, she handed me a small notebook. "Write what you noticed this week. Not just what changes in appearance, what changes in feeling. Those are the real transformations." That night, I wrote for hours. I wrote about how walking home felt different, how strangers seemed to respond to confidence they couldn't name, how mirrors no longer made me flinch. I wrote about how my reflection wasn't changing shape, it was changing story. And by the time I put the pen down, I realized something profound. Mrs. Langford wasn't transforming me into someone else. She was teaching me to stop apologizing for who I already was. Mrs. Langford had a way of appearing calm even when she was setting me up for something terrifying. The following week, I walked into the studio expecting another quiet session, more posture, more reflection, more practice. Instead, she greeted me with a garment bag hanging beside her. "Today," she said with that measured poise of hers, "we test what you've learned." I blinked, unsure.
"How?"
She unzipped the bag slowly, revealing an outfit that felt far too beautiful for me. Soft cream fabric, neatly pressed, simple yet elegant. "You're going to wear this," she said, "and come with me." I stared at it, my throat tightening. "Where?" She smiled faintly. "Lunch." It sounded harmless, but the meaning behind it wasn't. Lunch meant outside. It meant being seen. I don't know if I can," I said. "Which part?" she asked gently. "The clothes or the confidence?" Her questions sank deep. I took a shaky breath and whispered, "Both." She nodded, not dismissing the fear, just acknowledging it. "Then today, we borrow a little courage together." The next hour passed in silence. I changed behind the folding screen, slowly, carefully, as though every movement carried weight. The mirror reflected someone who looked fragile but real, almost like a sketch finally gaining color. Mrs. Langford helped me adjust small details, a strand of hair, the drape of fabric, the tilt of my chin. When she finally stepped back, she said quietly, "There. Don't analyze it. Just be." The car ride to the cafe was both the longest and shortest of my life. My heart kept hammering with each red light, each passing reflection in a window. Mrs. Langford kept speaking softly beside me, grounding me with simple truths. "You are not pretending. You're presenting." That's very different. The cafe was modest, tucked between an art gallery and a flower shop. The bell above the door chimed as we entered, and my breath caught when two strangers glanced our way. I waited for judgment, for laughter, for something cruel. None came. Just casual disinterest. We sat by the window. Mrs. Langford ordered tea for both of us, then watched me fidget with the napkin. "You're holding your breath," she whispered. "I know," I said, exhaling shakily. "I keep waiting for something to happen." "Something already has," she replied. "You're here." Her words lingered. For the first time, I dared to lift my gaze, to look around without fear. The world didn't collapse. The sky outside stayed blue. People chatted, smiled, passed by. I existed among them, unbroken, unseen in the way I'd feared. When we left, she didn't say much. Only when we returned to the car did she finally glance at me and ask, "So?" I thought for a moment, struggling to find words big enough. Finally, I said, "It felt like being on the edge of something but not falling." "That edge," she said, "is where you learn balance." I looked out the window, my reflection faint against the glass, and realized something quietly extraordinary. I wasn't afraid of mirrors anymore. The week after that cafe felt strangely quiet. I went back to my routines, Work, emails, errands, but everything seemed slightly off, as if I'd been tuned to a different frequency. Each reflection I caught of myself in glass or chrome carried a whisper of who I had been that day, sitting by the window with sunlight painting my face. I didn't tell anyone. Not about the lunch, not about the clothes, not about how Mrs. Langford had turned my fear into something I could breathe through. Yet, the silence between me and my boss's wife grew deeper, almost charged, like we shared a secret that was shaping me in ways neither of us could fully name. Then, one evening, as I stayed late finishing a project, the glass door slid open, and in stepped Mr. Langford himself. He wasn't supposed to be back from his trip until the next week. He looked the same, tailored suit, calm authority, but something about his gaze made me sit up straighter. "Still here?" he asked, glancing at my computer. "Just wrapping up, sir," I replied, trying to sound casual. He smiled faintly, diligent as ever. He moved closer, scanning the screen. I caught a faint trace of his cologne, clean and subtle. "You've improved," he noted, eyes narrowing slightly as he read through the draft presentation. "I can tell my wife's been working with you." My pulse jumped. "Oh, she's been helping with confidence and presentation skills." He nodded slowly, almost knowingly. "She has a talent for that." I couldn't tell if he meant something more. My palms grew damp as he leaned back against my desk. "You've changed," he said simply. The words hit harder than I expected. He studied me for a moment longer, then added, "Whatever she's doing, it's working. You seem lighter." "Lighter?" I asked, confused. "Like you're finally showing up as yourself," he said, standing. Then, with a faint smile, "Don't lose that." After he left, I just sat there, staring at the empty doorway. My reflection in the monitor looked the same, yet somehow not. It was as if his words had unlocked something Mrs. Langford had already seen, but now I couldn't unsee it either. The next day, she invited me back, not to the studio this time, but to their home. "Are you sure?" I asked when she texted. "Yes," she wrote back. "It's time you learned to move freely, even in spaces that once intimidated you." Their house was immaculate, walls lined with quiet art, soft scents of jasmine and cedarwood lingering in the air. She led me upstairs to a large room flooded with afternoon light. On the vanity lay neatly arranged brushes, fabrics, and delicate accessories. She gestured for me to sit. "Today," she said, "you'll learn how to exist without apology." Her tone wasn't commanding. It was calm, purposeful, the kind of voice that made you want to believe in yourself. She guided me through everything: how to soften gestures without hiding strength, how to meet a gaze with grace rather than defense, how to speak in tones that carried warmth instead of hesitation. Every lesson was about control, not submission, about revealing, not concealing. And then she said something that stayed with me forever. "You've mistaken transformation for loss," she told me. "But you're not losing yourself, you're editing what the world gets to see." I stared at her in silence, those words echoing in my mind. Later that afternoon, as she adjusted the last detail of my outfit, a simple blouse and long skirt that felt both foreign and right, she stepped back and smiled softly. "Now," she said, "let's test your composure." Before I could ask what she meant, I heard footsteps behind us. Mr. Langford. He stood at the doorway, surprised but not shocked, his expression unreadable. For a second, I froze, every nerve tightening. Mrs. Langford turned to him calmly. "Darling," she said, "you remember our little project." He studied me quietly, his eyes tracing my face with a gentleness I didn't expect. Then he nodded once, almost approvingly. "She's doing well," he said. The word she felt like a lightning bolt through me. Terrifying, exhilarating, real. Mrs. Langford gave a small, proud smile. "Yes," she agreed softly. "She's learning to be herself." For the first time, I didn't correct her. I didn't shrink from it. I just stood there, heart racing but steady. After he left, she turned to me and said, "You see? The world doesn't fall apart when you are seen." And that night, as I walked home under the faint city glow, every reflection in every dark window whispered that same truth back to me. The next few weeks blurred together like soft watercolors that refused to stay inside the lines. At work, the familiar rhythm of deadlines and meetings returned, yet beneath it all something had changed, quietly, permanently. I could feel it in how I walked down the hallway, in how my voice carried when I spoke during presentations, in how I no longer avoided my own reflection in the elevator mirrors. It wasn't that anyone said anything outright, but eyes lingered a little longer. People noticed confidence, not clothes. That subtle calm Mrs. Langford had drawn out of me had begun to spill into everything I did, and even though it was terrifying to feel that exposed, it was also liberating. One afternoon, I overheard two colleagues whispering near the coffee machine. "He's different lately," one said. "More composed, softer, but more sure of himself." Their words weren't meant to be cruel. They sounded puzzled, curious even, and that was worse somehow, because part of me wanted them to see. That night, I told Mrs. Langford what I'd heard. She listened with her usual stillness, then asked, "And how did that make you feel?" I thought for a long time before answering. Like they finally noticed me, but not the part one used to show. Her expression softened. That's what authenticity feels like at first, exposure. But it's also what sets you free. The next session she planned was unlike any before. No mirrors, no lessons, just a conversation. She poured tea for both of us and sat across the table. "Tell me about the first time you hid," she said quietly. The question caught me off guard. I told her about middle school, about how one day I'd worn something softer, just a scarf that wasn't meant for boys, but I liked it. And the laughter that followed. The way I folded in on myself afterward, deciding that hiding was safer than being seen wrong. She didn't interrupt. She let the silence breathe around my words, as though making space for the memory to finally rest. When I finished, she said something that made my eyes sting. "You've spent so long fearing ridicule that you've forgotten the quiet power of elegance. It's not weakness. It's ownership." After that evening, she introduced something new into our routine movement. She said the body remembers what the mind forgets, and so she made me walk, turn, gesture, speak, not as an imitation of someone else, but as a rediscovery of myself. At first, it felt strange, overly graceful, almost performative. But then it began to feel natural. My movements found rhythm, my voice found melody, and I realized that I had been carrying years of stiffness, like armor. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was giving a small presentation at work, nothing special, just a pitch for a new campaign. But as I spoke, I noticed my boss in the back of the room. Mr. Langford watched quietly, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When it ended, the room filled with polite applause, and I caught a glimpse of something rare, pride in his eyes. Later, as I packed up, he approached me. "You've grown," he said simply. "Thank you, sir." He hesitated, then added, "I can tell my wife's lessons are having an effect." I felt a rush of warmth, mixed with a strange vulnerability. "They've helped me understand myself better," I said carefully. He nodded once. "That's all that matters." As he turned to leave, he paused and said over his shoulder, "Confidence looks good on you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That night, I sat in my small apartment, the city lights washing through the blinds like restless ghosts. I thought about his words, about her lessons, about the faint tremor of fear that still sat beneath every step forward. It wasn't just about clothes or posture or poise anymore, it was about honesty. About learning to align the outside with the inside, no matter how quietly that truth hummed beneath the noise of the world. I didn't know it then, but the real test was coming. A company event where every mask would be stripped away, and I'd have to decide whether to hide again or stand before everyone as the person I was becoming. And deep down, I knew Mrs. Langford wouldn't let me choose fear. When Mrs. Langford told me about the gala, I froze mid-sentence. "It's not optional," she said softly, sipping her tea. "You're one of the key contributors this quarter. Your boss wants you there." My stomach tightened. I pictured the banquet hall, the polished suits, the sharp laughter of executives. I'd been to company events before, always tucked into corners, watching others glide through conversations with ease. But now everything felt different. I wasn't the same version of myself anymore, and I didn't know which one the world expected to see. I tried to sound calm. What should I wear? Her lips curved into a knowing smile. What feels right, not what feels safe. That single line haunted me for days. The night before the gala, she invited me over. The house felt quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. When I arrived, a dress hung on a mannequin by the window. Nothing loud or extravagant, just simple elegance. Navy fabric, soft and fluid, with clean lines that caught the light in motion. I stared at it. That's beautiful. Mrs. Langford tilted her head. It's not about beauty. It's about presence. This won't disguise you. It will reveal you. I hesitated, my throat dry. You think I'm ready for that? She smiled faintly. You were ready the moment you stopped apologizing. The next day passed in fragments, meetings, calls, distractions, but my mind stayed fixed on that evening. When the time came, I stood in front of my mirror for what felt like an eternity. My reflection looked calm, but my heart raced like thunder under silk. Mrs. Langford had done my hair earlier that day, soft waves framing my face in a way that felt impossibly delicate. As I applied the last bit of subtle color to my lips, I whispered to my reflection, "You can do this. You deserve to be seen." The ballroom glimmered with gold light, chandeliers swaying gently above hundreds of people. The sound of clinking glasses, distant laughter, and the faint rhythm of a jazz band filled the air. I entered quietly, each step deliberate, feeling the fabric move like second skin. For a moment, no one noticed, and then they did. A few heads turned. Conversations paused briefly. Not in mockery, but in that curious way people react to something unexpected yet graceful. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept walking, remembering every lesson Mrs. Langford had taught me: posture, poise, the power of composure. I found my seat near the center, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. Then I heard a familiar voice. "You made it." I looked up. Mr. Langford stood there, holding a glass of water, his gaze steady and kind. "Yes," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I almost didn't." He smiled faintly. "And yet here you are." As the evening unfolded, I felt layers of fear begin to peel away. A few colleagues approached me, unsure at first, but their curiosity soon melted into conversation. They asked about my work, my projects, not about my appearance. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't performing. I was just being. Later in the night, Mrs. Langford joined me on the terrace overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered below, like a reflection of possibility. "You did well," she said, her voice warm. I laughed softly, exhaling all the nerves I'd held in. "I thought I'd faint when I walked in." "Confidence isn't the absence of fear," she said. "It's walking through it with grace." I turned toward her. "Why do you help me so much?" She looked thoughtful, the city lights glinting in her eyes. "Because once I was taught to hide too. And I promised myself that if I ever saw someone trying to find their voice, I'd help them speak it." We stood in silence for a while, the night humming around us. Then she placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You've changed," she whispered. "But don't ever mistake this for disguise. This is emergence." As I drove home later, the city blurred past like streaks of gold. I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. I felt like a person finally learning the shape of their own truth, someone who could exist in light without flinching. The gala hadn't been about appearances at all. It had been about standing in the open, beneath the gaze of 1,000 eyes, and realizing that visibility didn't have to mean vulnerability. It could mean freedom. The Monday after the gala began like any other day, but it didn't feel like any other. The city looked sharper, the air felt lighter, and even the reflection in my apartment mirror seemed to hold its own calm. Walking into the office, I felt the usual hum of keyboards and quiet chatter, yet something in the atmosphere had shifted. People looked up, smiled more openly, greeted me by name instead of the polite nods that used to fill the gaps between us. "Great speech Friday," one of the senior designers said as she passed my desk. You looked confident. It was inspiring. I thanked her, half expecting hesitation or curiosity, but none came. Just genuine warmth. The kind that made the walls I'd built start to loosen brick by brick. Around noon, Mr. Langford called me into his office. I stepped inside cautiously, still unsure how the weekend might have shaped his perspective. He gestured toward the chair opposite him and said, "Sit." His tone wasn't cold. It was thoughtful, almost searching. "You made quite the impression at the gala," he said, glancing at the tablet in front of him. "Clients mentioned your composure. They noticed how you carried yourself, how you presented our work." I felt my heart race. "I was nervous," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "Confidence always hides a heartbeat." Then, after a pause, "My wife told me what this journey has meant for you." I froze. He leaned back, hands folded. "I want you to know I admire it, the courage to change, to find honesty in front of people who expect you to stay the same." His words settled in my chest like a quiet storm. I managed a nod, but inside, I could feel the weight of everything I'd tried to keep separate beginning to blur together. As I left his office, a strange mixture of relief and fear followed me. The mask had slipped completely, and no one had reached out to fix it. They'd simply accepted what they saw. That evening, I went back to the Langfords' home. Mrs. Langford was on the balcony, the last of the sunset spilling through the glass. She turned when she heard me. "I heard about your day," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "You handled it beautifully." "I didn't expect acceptance," I confessed. "I kept waiting for the moment everything would fall apart." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "That's the old fear talking, the one you fed for years. It still wants to be heard, but it doesn't get to make your choices anymore." I leaned against the railing, watching the city's lights flicker to life one by one. "It feels strange," I said quietly, "to be seen this way, to not have to hide. It's like I've stepped out of a shadow, and the light's almost too bright." "That's what truth feels like at first," she replied. Uncomfortably vivid. We stood there a while longer, the cool air brushing against us. Then she said something that would stay with me forever. "You can't live your life in compartments. The world doesn't need another divided soul trying to please everyone. It needs someone who shows up whole." That night, I went home and opened the closet that had once been a hiding place. Inside hung fragments of two worlds, suits that no longer felt like armor, soft fabrics that no longer felt like fantasy. I ran my hand over both and realized that the truth wasn't about choosing one or the other. It was about merging them, letting every piece of who I was coexist without apology. The next morning, I walked into work wearing something simple, a blend of what I had been and what I was becoming. Subtle, but real. Nobody stared. Nobody whispered. One of the interns smiled and said, "Morning. You look great." And for the first time in years, I believed it. Later that week, Mrs. Langford sent me a short message. "Authenticity doesn't need permission. Only practice." I saved it. Because she was right, every day from then on would be practice. Not just for confidence or elegance or grace, but for honesty. For showing up as someone who finally knew how to live in their own reflection. I didn't notice how much the air in my life had changed until the day the invitation arrived. It was a simple white envelope on my desk, embossed with gold lettering. "Annual Leadership Conference. Presenters announced." Inside, beneath my name, was the line that made my hands shake. Keynote speaker, Jordan Hayes. That was me. For years I'd watched other names fill that space. Confident, unflinching people who commanded the stage as if it were their second skin. The idea that I would stand there, in front of hundreds of peers, investors, and strangers, was almost absurd. But when I showed the envelope to Mrs. Langford later that day, she only smiled like she'd seen it coming. "I told you," she said, sliding a cup of tea toward me. "Visibility finds those who stop hiding." Her certainty terrified me more than the speech itself. In the weeks that followed, I prepared obsessively, writing, editing, rewriting every line until the paper smelled of ink and nervous energy. Yet the real preparation wasn't on the page. It was in the mirror. Each night, I practiced posture, tone, presence. Not to impress, but to own. To carry into that room the same calm she'd taught me to wear like a second heartbeat. But there was still the question of how I would appear. Which version of myself would stand under those lights? One evening, I confessed my confusion. "I don't want to shock anyone," I said quietly. "I also don't want to lie, by omission." Mrs. Langford regarded me for a long moment. Authenticity doesn't mean explanation. It means alignment. When the inside matches the outside, truth speaks for itself. Her words echoed through my head as the day drew closer. The morning of the conference, I woke before dawn. The city outside my window was still sleeping, its towers wrapped in early fog. My apartment smelled faintly of jasmine from the candle I'd forgotten to blow out the night before. I stood before the mirror one last time. The person looking back wasn't a disguise, not anymore. The outfit I chose was a quiet compromise between courage and subtlety, a soft cream blouse beneath a tailored blazer, navy slacks that moved fluidly when I walked. A harmony between where I came from and where I was going. The mirror didn't judge. It simply reflected a person who had stopped asking permission to exist. When I arrived at the auditorium, the bustle of voices, the glow of the stage lights, the rows of expectant faces nearly unraveled my composure. I could feel my heart thrumming like the opening note of a song I wasn't sure I remembered. Then, from the side of the stage, I caught sight of her, Mrs. Langford, standing near the back, her arms folded gently, eyes steady. One small nod from her was all it took. The moment my name was called, I stepped into the light. At first, the brightness made it hard to see anyone. That helped. The words came slowly, then faster, until they flowed the way she'd taught me, not as memorized sentences, but as living breath. I spoke about creativity, vulnerability, innovation. About the courage it takes to reinvent yourself in a world addicted to sameness. Somewhere in the middle of the speech, the fear burned away. I could feel the room listening not to how I looked, but to what I said. Every gesture, every inflection carried the quiet truth of someone who had finally stopped pretending to be smaller than they were. When it ended, there was a pause, that delicate heartbeat of silence before applause, and then the room rose. The sound swelled around me, warm and impossible. I glanced once more toward the back, where Mrs. Langford stood. She didn't clap at first. She just smiled, a proud, knowing smile that said, "You did it. You became visible." Afterward, people came up to me in the lobby. Some wanted to talk about the project, others about courage, a few just to say thank you. Not one person asked about what I was wearing or who I was becoming. They simply met me as I was. That night, back home, I stood by the window watching the reflection of the city lights on the glass. I realized that the fear of being seen had quietly dissolved into something else, the desire to keep being seen. Mrs. Langford texted me just one line before midnight. "The world didn't change tonight. You did." I replied with trembling hands. "You gave me the courage to." Her answer came seconds later. "No. You gave it to yourself. I just handed you the mirror." And as I looked at my reflection, framed by the night and the lights and everything I'd survived to stand here, I whispered the truth I'd been circling for months. I'm not afraid anymore. A few months passed after the conference, though time no longer felt like a series of days. It felt more like chapters, each one softer, lighter, and more real than the last. My career didn't just change, I did. Meetings that once felt like battles now flowed with ease. My words carried something new, confidence without sharpness, authority without armor. I found myself smiling at people more often, and strangely, they smiled back as if they'd been waiting for me to do it first. I think they had. Still, there was something unfinished. Something that kept echoing in the quiet moments after long workdays or on walks home through the city twilight. It wasn't regret or guilt, just a tug, like a thread I hadn't followed all the way. It led me back to her, Mrs. Langford, the woman who had set this all in motion, not through control or command, but through quiet conviction. Through the way she'd looked at me when I didn't yet know how to look at myself. I went to see her on a Sunday afternoon. The Langfords' house looked exactly as it had that first day I entered it. the one that used to feel like another world. But now, instead of fear, I felt gratitude press against my chest like a heartbeat I could finally hear. She was in the garden when I found her, kneeling among the roses, gloved hands gently turning the soil. The light caught her hair in faint streaks of silver. "Jordan," she said, without even turning. "I wondered when you'd come back." Her voice still carried that calm knowing, the kind that disarmed me every time. I knelt beside her, the smell of earth and rain between us. "You knew I would?" "I hoped," she said, finally meeting my gaze. "You always had that unfinished look in your eyes. The kind that wants closure, not applause." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took in the quiet, the garden's hum, the rustle of leaves, the strange comfort of being back where it all began. "I wanted to thank you," I said at last. "For everything. For seeing me before I did." She smiled faintly. "You're thanking me for something that was already inside you. All I did was remind you it existed. I don't think I'd have found it without you. Maybe not. But that doesn't mean it wasn't yours all along." We sat there for a while, just breathing in the peace. She poured us tea from a small thermos, still with that same ritual calm. Then, softly, I asked, "Did you ever regret any of it? The way you pushed me to change?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of something unguarded. "Sometimes," she said quietly. "Not because of what you became, but because of what it made me confront." I frowned gently. "What do you mean?" She set her teacup down, eyes on the flowers. "When I saw you evolve, I realized how long I'd been living through others. Through control, through shaping people to fit visions I no longer dared to live myself. Watching you step into your truth reminded me that I'd stopped stepping into mine." The admission hung in the air, raw and unpolished. "I thought helping you was about teaching you confidence," she continued. "But it became my mirror, too. You showed me what courage really looks like, and how much I'd been avoiding it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The garden seemed to hold its breath. Then I said quietly, "Maybe we helped each other." She looked at me then, truly looked, the way she did in those early days, except now there was no teacher and student, no boss's wife and employee. Just two people who had both walked through their own transformations and found themselves standing in the same sunlight. When I left her house that evening, the sky had turned soft lavender, the first stars beginning to appear. As I walked down the quiet street, I passed the old reflection of myself in the Langfords' windows, the same one that used to scare me. Only now it didn't. Because this time, the reflection wasn't a disguise. It was simply me. I paused and smiled at that truth, not triumphant, not defiant, just peaceful. The journey that began in fear and confusion had ended not in perfection, but in understanding. And maybe that was what all transformation really was, not becoming someone else, but finally being allowed to arrive as yourself. When I got home that night, there was one last message waiting on my phone. From her. "The world will keep trying to define you. Don't let it. Just keep becoming." I saved it without replying. Some words are too perfect to answer. Then I turned off the lights, stood before the mirror, and saw a face that no longer asked questions, only smiled softly back. For the first time in my life, I whispered good night not to a stranger, but to myself.